Hola, bienvenidos al episodio 93. Welcome to episode 93 of the Learn Spanish con Salsa podcast. In this episode, I'm interviewing Kim Haas, the executive producer, host, and creator of Afro-Latino Travels with Kim Haas. Premiering on PBS during Hispanic Heritage Month, this groundbreaking TV series captures the heart and soul of Afro-Latino culture by exploring the history, art, music, dance, cuisine, and more that African descendants brought to Central and South America and the Caribbean. In part one of our conversation, Kim shares her advice for language learners and the most important experience that helped her reach fluency in Spanish, Portuguese, and Italian. I hope you enjoy this conversation with Kim. Entonces, vamos a empezar. Let's get started. This episode of the Learn Spanish con Salsa podcast is sponsored by UTalk. When you use the UTalk app, you develop your speaking and listening skills in a new language from day one. UTalk features 145 different languages, including 3 varieties of Spanish. Subscribe today to get access to all 2,500 words and phrases in your target language, covering over 60 different topics. To save 30% on your subscription, go to learnspanishconsalsa.com/utalk. Happy language learning.
Bienvenidos! Welcome to the Learn Spanish con Salsa podcast, the show for Spanish learners that love music, travel, and culture. Close your grammar textbooks, shut down the language apps, and open your ears to how Spanish is spoken in the real world. Let us show you how to go from beginner to bilingual. Here is your host, certified language coach, Tamara Marie.
Hola, espero que estén muy bien. I hope you all are doing well. This is actually going to be just part one of my conversation with Kim. And in this episode, we'll talk a lot about language learning, and she'll share her rich experiences as she became fluent in 3 different languages. But before I get to the conversation with Kim, I do have an announcement. So as I mentioned, this is episode 93. So we are coming very close to episode 100 of the Learn Spanish con Salsa podcast. And to celebrate our 100th episode coming up very soon, actually next month, we'll reach episode 100. We will be doing giveaways throughout this month and next month to celebrate our landmark 100th episode. So starting this week, our first giveaway is going to be a copy of our ebook, 115 Essential Spanish Phrases. Now, this will give you insight into some of the most commonly used Spanish phrases that you will find in daily conversation. This will help you not only understand Spanish better, but it'll help you refine the way you speak Spanish so that you can sound more like a native speaker. So we are giving this ebook out between now and October 16th, so next Friday, and all you have to do to qualify to get our free ebook is send us a voice note. Let us know about your favorite episode or a takeaway that you received or just what you enjoy about listening to the podcast. We will be using these voice notes in our 100th episode. So if you are interested, just go to learnspanishconsalsa.com/voice. That's learnspanishconsalsa.com/voice. And there you'll be able to just click on record and leave us a voice note. So again, just share what you like about the podcast, your number one takeaway, your favorite episode. We just want to hear from you and hear your feedback. And if we include your voice note in our episode, our 100th episode coming up next month, then we will send you a copy of the ebook, 115 Essential Spanish Phrases, okay? So make sure if you want to be part of our 100th episode that you leave us a voice note, learnspanishconsalsa.com/voice, and we will send you a copy of the ebook, all right? So now let's get started with this week's episode. So first, I want to tell you a little bit about Kim before we dive into the conversation. Kim Haas is the executive producer, host, and creator of Afro-Latino Travels with Kim Haas. She has been active in Afro-Latino issues for more than a decade, and she's also the founder of losafrolatinos.com, a blog celebrating Afro-Latino culture. Kim speaks fluent Spanish, Italian, and Portuguese. She served as director of marketing for WWSI TV Telemundo, and she also served as an on-camera pledge host in English, Spanish, and Italian for WYBE TV in Philadelphia. She's a member of Delta Sigma Theta sorority and is passionate about her work with Afro-Latino Travels. She is extremely proud to be one of the few upcoming Black female travel hosts on public television, hoping to lead the path for more to follow. So with that, I hope you enjoy part 1 of my conversation with Kim Haas. Hola, Kim. Bienvenida. Welcome to the Learn Spanish con Salsa podcast.
Bueno, hola, Tamara. Muchísimas gracias.
So to start out, if you could just share a little bit about you and what it is that you do.
So it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much. And I am executive producer, host, and creator of PBS Travel show, Afro-Latino Travels with Kim Haas. And I also have a media and community outreach firm, and we are based in the New York City area. I'm originally from Philadelphia, so the city of brotherly love and sisterly affection. I always want to make sure I include the sisterly part.
Yes, always have to include the sisters.
Yes.
And so so you started your own company, and how did you get started with that?
Well, I knew early on, as probably a young child, that I wanted to be in a media, television, and I wanted to combine it with my love of languages. Haas Media really allows me to do those things and put together these great interests of mine into a career. So it started pretty early. I think since I can remember, I really always wanted to combine these interests.
And how did you get started in language learning? You mentioned you have a passion for languages as well. And I know sometimes, especially in the African American community or Black community here in the U.S., when you start to learn another language, people ask, well, why are you learning that? Or are you from that culture? Where are your parents from? These are questions I get, like, why are you learning Spanish? So what first piqued your interest in Spanish specifically and just in language learning in general?
Yeah, sure. Well, I love to tell this story because it just means so much to me. My grandmother took me to Acapulco, Mexico, when I was about 7 or 8 years old. And I can remember that someone taught me to count to 20 in the hotel lobby. And from that day on, I can't remember not being involved in languages and culture and wanting to travel. So my grandmother, I owe it all to my grandmother, who really started me on this journey. And she had just a huge heart, loved people, loved traveling. And she opened the door to me for this incredible journey. And so it's due to my grandmother. No doubt she's the inspiration, and she's where all of this comes from. My grandmother took me to Hawaii, and we traveled, and she loved to travel, and she just really opened up this world to me. And so since then, I've always loved to travel. I always love to encourage people, no matter how old they are, to travel, to get out, to go see. So if anybody comes to me and asks me, oh, should I go? I say yes. Should I go to such and such a place? Should I study abroad? I'm thinking about studying abroad. I say yes, 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 and yes. And so I try to really encourage people, no matter what your circumstance or situation, is to travel. And it's just so important. So I was just so fortunate that my grandmother shared this with me, and at such an early age.
Yeah, that is amazing. I know a lot of folks just don't ever get exposed to that. I think a lot of it is what we see growing up and what we see around us and who we have modeling for us. And if we've never seen someone just pick up and travel without fear, or seen someone decide to learn a language, we might not ever attempt it because it's just not around us. So I think that's amazing that you had that influence from such a young age and were able to really carry it through to make a career out of it. So I'm really impressed by that.
Thank you.
So you had this experience when you were 7. Your grandmother had this great influence on you, and she opened up this world of travel to you. So how did you go from sort of that initial spark to actually becoming fluent in Spanish? Did you do a study abroad, or what was your process for learning the language?
So I did. I studied abroad junior year in Spain, in Sevilla, La Maravilla. And I lived with a wonderful family. It was a mother and 4 children. And the father had died, I think, months prior. So I was the first student that she hosted, and I just had an amazing time. I mean, it was just pretty incredible. And so that was my junior year abroad, but I had traveled prior to that and pretty much knew I wanted to study abroad. I mean, that was always on my radar, but I had been traveling with my family. So my parents and my brother and I, we would travel a lot, quite a bit throughout the United States, do a lot of domestic travel. And then my extended family, we traveled to a couple of islands in the Caribbean, and did some traveling. But I think the languages and really studying and learning the languages, and when I became, I say, fluent, was really when I lived in Spain junior year, because there was nothing like it, because the family that I lived with did not speak English. And so that was actually perfect, even though it made it very challenging at times, but it was perfect for, a student who needed to learn and wanted to learn the languages, because it really forced me to have to ask the question, to be embarrassed, to feel, how do I maybe motion what I'm trying to say if I didn't have a dictionary or something in front of me? So it wasn't until I really lived in Spain and Seville for a year where the language fluency and understanding really, I think, picked up.
Yeah, and I know a lot of people, share that experience about studying abroad. And I never studied abroad, but I did when I travel, when I had the opportunity to do so as an adult, because in college I was studying something very different than languages. But when I did get the opportunity to travel, I would do, an immersion program, and I would stay, they call it like a homestay. So I actually stay with the family. And You're right. You really don't have a choice when you're with people that don't speak English, or you don't have another language in common. You've got to figure it out. So
that's right.
It's challenging, but it really does help you, I think, at the end of the day, begin to figure out ways to communicate even when you don't know everything.
Right.
Because you're always going to be in a situation where you've got to figure it out, right? It's not all going to be in the textbook laid out for you, the way people actually speak.
Yes, but I think if you really want to learn a language, it may be harder, especially in the beginning, and it forces you out of your comfort zone and all those things. It forces you to be resourceful. But I guess speaking from my personal experience, but I can see how my language abilities really developed over that almost year. And I have no doubt that I would not have had those kinds of experiences and returned back to the United States with the same level, perhaps of proficiency, if I hadn't lived with a family that didn't speak English. I mean, you have to force yourself, and it's easy. It's easy to, go around with friends who speak English only. And I did have a really good friend of mine who was from the States. But again, a lot of my time was spent with the family, and then I'd go home with them to their pueblo, Espera, in Cádiz province, and no one spoke. That's a whole nother podcast. But no one spoke English. And so if you can imagine this, 19-year-old African-American girl coming to this town where they hadn't seen anybody Black in, I couldn't tell you how long. All the windows open when I was in town. I can't remember how many people were there. I mean, I'm guessing maybe 1,000 people. So as soon as you came, as soon as somebody new arrived, everybody knew it. And it was one of those, it's a whitewashed town in Andalusia. And it was pretty, it turned out to be pretty special. And I was really well received. But in the beginning, I was somebody, that they hadn't seen anybody Black. in that town, and probably, I don't know if ever, or perhaps something on television, someone on television. So there was a lot of learning and a lot of different kinds of experiences, but you just you get stronger as a result of it, and you learn what you're made of, and you just keep growing.
Right. And I can imagine that there was a lot of curiosity, and they probably asked you a lot of questions about not just being, from the US, but also, as you mentioned, as I've heard, I've never been to Spain, but I've heard that there's not a large population of Black people in Spain. And the ones that are there tend to come from like Northern Africa. And
Right.
There's also a population from the Middle East, and that there's, varying degrees of, I don't want to say xenophobia, or just how people perceive people that
Yeah.
are from Africa and that are from Arab-speaking countries. So I'm wondering how you were received there. You said that people were friendly, but I'm sure they were pretty curious about who you were and where you were from.
Oh, yes. And let me clarify. I mean, people were very friendly in Espera, in the town, in Cadiz province. But when people stared. People stared at me like, it was like there's, you're thinking, is something wrong? And a lot of times people just hadn't seen someone Black before. In Seville, a larger city, people stared. But the experiences, so there's, different levels of experiences. Experience you have on the street, which is one thing. And sometimes, people would say things that weren't always too nice. So I want to be very, clear about that. But then the experience that I had with my family that I lived with, I felt like I was truly one of the family, a member of the family. And so, you take these things, you have different experiences. I always felt like the family that I lived with, I was truly welcomed, and they were as giving and loving as, you could ask for. But there were people on the trip who also, study abroad, who did not feel as welcomed, and they were not Black. So, sometimes they didn't eat with their families. They really felt separate and apart. So I think it really just depends on the family and your situation. But I had an incredible year, and would not have changed it for the world. But yeah, that's not to say that there weren't times when, it was challenging for a whole host of reasons.
And as a part of that, do you recall any moments where something got lost in translation, where you had, one of those experiences that we have when we're learning languages is we always make mistakes, right?
Sure.
You never get it 100% right. So is there anything you recall that was like a funny moment, or something that you're trying to say, you couldn't remember the right word, or you said the wrong word and you got a reaction that you weren't expecting?
Oh my gosh, I can't remember one particular instance, but I can just remember when I first arrived. I think it must have been summer. So before school started, Nina, the mother, she, greeted me when I came in. So we're arriving after being on the train from Madrid. And I think she was asking me, looking, did I want to shower? Do you want to go to the bathroom and change? But I didn't understand a word she said. And, you're just thinking, you're studying Spanish in school, in high school, you think you have some understanding. And I just remember being totally clueless until we're like pantomiming and trying to, communicate with each other until finally, I understood what she meant. But that I can remember that was a real ordeal, just trying to, understand what she was saying and get used to her accent, the speed in which she spoke. It's a whole host of things when you're trying to learn another language. There were just, let me tell you, a ton of experiences, I'm sure. But that was one, maybe just because it was my first day there. But that was one that I always remember because it turned out to be something just so natural and simple. Hey, you've been traveling for, however many hours, would you like to come up and change and use the bathroom? But I had no clue what she was saying. None.
And I think it's funny. It's funny that I think the way that language is taught in school, that those are the things you often don't get taught. Like something very simple that you would think would be, it's part of day-to-day conversation, but, instead, I don't know how your experience was in school, but for me, when I first started taking Spanish, it was more like, hey, how do we conjugate verbs that end in AR? Not like, oh, how do you say something practical? Like, I need to change my clothes and take a shower.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. The things that you said, the practical things that actually, can get you to the bathroom.
Right.
Those kinds of things. But you go into, the subjunctive and so forth, which is important, but, not when you're just arriving at somebody's home or, it's like you said, the very practical things, I think that are most important. So yeah, it opened my eyes about what I did and didn't learn in high school. But it was, and I encourage everyone, I know we're living in a certain, period of time right now where things are truly, uncertain, but I think I encourage folks, if you can get out and study abroad for a month, 6 weeks, whatever it is, I say go, go, and go.
Message well received, and I'm ready to go too. And I can't wait till things get back to normal
Yes.
because I will be traveling to some of the places that are on my bucket list. I want to ask you more about your Afro-Latino travel series, but first, before we get off of the language learning topic, I have a question for you, and this is more of like a personal thing because I started learning Portuguese after I learned Spanish, and I saw that you speak Spanish, Italian, and Portuguese. So I have to ask, how do you keep yourself from mixing up those three languages? Because I know they're very close in different ways. And even for me, when I first started learning Portuguese, I really ended up speaking Portuñol because I was mixing up Spanish and Portuguese all the time.
Yes.
So what strategies did you use to make sure you didn't mix up those three very similar languages?
Great question. The last time, well, in school, I remember, because I went to the University of Pittsburgh for undergrad. So I remember one semester I had Spanish courses, Portuguese, and Italian. And that was a real doozy. I mean, I had to go, remember, before I went into the classroom, like to think, okay, which language am I going into? I mean, really, really focus. And it would take me a few minutes, as class started to wrap myself around which language and to really focus in on that. So it wasn't easy. And like you said, I mean, with so many similarities among the three, it can be really tricky. So that was the last time that I had all three at pretty much the same time. I also, just because I've spent more time really with Spanish and then with Italian and then Portuguese, because I spent some time in Brazil too. I often think about the endings, and because the endings of the words can also help guide me. So I sometimes will use that to try and focus in on that, like Italian, tradizione, or tradición in Spanish. So I try and kind of remind myself and think about which language I'm working in. It's really putting, for me, one foot in front of the other and just saying a prayer.
So you just go in and see what happens. Go for it.
Yeah, just right? I kind of mix it up and just, cross my fingers, somebody's understanding.
Wow, yeah, you're brave to take all three at the same time, because I know usually people say if you're going to study multiple languages at once, that they should be very different, like something like Spanish and Japanese, because you can't really mix those up too much.
Yes.
But yeah, I decided to learn Portuguese because I was going to Brazil as well, and I was like, I'm going to prepare for my trip. This is pretty similar to Spanish. It shouldn't be so hard. And I just actually shared the story on the podcast the last few episodes about my trip to Brazil. It didn't go as planned, and I ended up in Argentina.
I heard.
But long story short,
yes, it was a good one.
So my brain had switched back to Spanish, and by the time I had got to Brazil, I was all mixed up. I mean, I was speaking Spanish. I was trying to think in Portuguese, but my brain wasn't clicking at first. It took me almost until it was time for me to leave Brazil before I actually got the hang of it again. So
sure. Yeah. But you know what? I mean, what you just mentioned about the advice of, taking three different languages. But you know what? I mean, people always have rules, and maybe I shouldn't say it's a rule, but it's advice, right? But take what you want to take. I mean, I think study what you want to study. And those were the courses that I wanted to study. And I wouldn't have changed it for anything because that's what I enjoy. And those were the languages that I enjoyed, traveling to Brazil, studying Afro-Brazilian culture in particular. In undergrad, I spent 6 weeks in Taormina in Sicily. So, they're Romance languages, and obviously with their incredible similarities, but those are the languages that I wanted to study. And so I think if someone, is a little apprehensive but enjoys the languages, go for it. I mean, and then if you find that it's too much or it's, maybe a little too crazy for you, okay, maybe step back. But I think, people make those suggestions and I heard them too. But I think people also looked at me funny when I said I was a Spanish major. It's like, oh, do you want to teach? And I was like, no, I really want to, get into Spanish language television and TV and combine them both. And people, when I said I was a Spanish major, just looked at me like, I was some kind of freak or something. I mean, you take it with a grain of salt.
Yeah, and I always say that too. Like, you have to test things out for yourself.
Right.
People can tell you all sorts of things, but that's based on their experience. And
exactly.
Your goals are probably very different from their goals. So yeah, I like that. Just, there are rules, but I always say rules are meant to be broken. I'm a rebel.
Absolutely.
I'm a natural rebel myself. So, so yes, definitely. Take that advice, try things out for yourself, and follow your interest and your passion. Because the bottom line is, if you're not interested in something, you're not going to want to do it anyway.
Exactly.
So just because someone says, oh, you have to learn Mandarin if you want to be in business, like they were telling us when I was in business school. Mm-hmm. Well, you know what? Maybe you don't want to learn Mandarin. It's okay. Yes. Do what you want to do and find out where your passions lie and how you can combine those. So I think that's really, really great advice to break the rules, right? I'm always all for that.
Yeah. I mean, and live your life, do what you want to do. I mean, I just say go for it and live it the way you want to live it. And if you want to take 3 languages at the same time, go for it.
I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Kim. She has such a wealth of knowledge and experience to share. And we are not done. Tune in next Tuesday for part 2 of our conversation, where we'll talk more about her series, Afro-Latino Travels with Kim Haas, and we'll talk about how she got started and some of the surprising facts that she finds out in her conversations with African descendants in Latin America. It's a very, very eye-opening conversation as she shares her travel. So make sure that you're subscribed to the podcast so that you will be the first notified when we release that episode next week. And if you want to find out where you can catch Afro-Latino Travels with Kim Haas, where you live, make sure you go to our show notes page, learnspanishconsalsa.com/93. That's learnspanishconsalsa.com/93. That is for episode 93 of the podcast. And there we will have a link to Kim's website where you can find all of the information about how to tune in to this series. So it is playing in different markets at different times. So you have to make sure you go in and check the listings in your area for the date and time that the show airs. But I'm telling you, you do not want to miss it. It's just a great, great show. And we'll talk all about it next week. And Kim will share a little behind the scenes of how she got started and some of the things that happened as she was traveling and filming the show. And don't forget, if you want to be a part of episode 100, make sure you leave us a voice note at learnspanishconsalsa.com/voice and let us know what you liked about this episode or your favorite episode of the podcast. As always, I hope something that you heard today has helped you go at least one step closer from Spanish beginner to bilingual. Hasta la próxima.
Thank you for listening to the Learn Spanish con Salsa podcast at learnspanishconsalsa.com.